Imagine waking up to discover that the wealth of your entire nation, your banks, your industries, even your government, was built on a lie. Not a small lie, but a colossal fraud so perfectly crafted that it fooled kings, merchants, bankers, journalists, and thousands of ordinary people across Europe. And yet this massive deception was not exposed by soldiers, spies, or politicians. It was uncovered by one quiet, careful accountant who refused to ignore the numbers. This is the unbelievable true story of how a single accountant exposed the biggest financial fraud of the 1800s, the scandal of Poyais, the fake kingdom invented by one of history's greatest con men, Gregor MacGregor. Our story begins in the early 1800s, when Europe was desperate for opportunity. The Napoleonic Wars had drained treasuries, destroyed cities, and left millions unemployed. People were hungry for hope, for escape, for new lands where they could rebuild their lives. Into this desperation stepped a man who understood something powerful. In chaotic times, people will believe anything that promises a better future. His name was Gregor MacGregor, a Scottish soldier who had served under Simon Bolivar during the Latin American independence wars. MacGregor was charming, confident, articulate, and completely ruthless. But what set him apart was his boldness. He didn't just want fame or wealth. He wanted to create an empire built entirely on imagination. In 1820, MacGregor announced he had been granted a vast piece of land by an indigenous king in Central America. He called this land Poyais. To investors, he described it as a tropical paradise. Fertile land, sparkling rivers, gold-rich hills, democratic government, and a thriving capital city called St. Joseph. In reality, Poyais did not exist. The area he pointed to was an uninhabited, mosquito-infested stretch of swamp on the coast of modern-day Honduras. But MacGregor understood that most Europeans had never traveled, never seen maps, and had no way to verify his claims. He also understood the power of official-looking paperwork. To make his lie believable, he printed Poyais currency, created a fake constitution, issued government bonds, designed a national coat of arms, set up an embassy in London, and even wrote a 355-page book promoting the country as resources, though he pretended it was written by a neutral explorer. The fraud was brilliant. Investors saw documents. They saw maps. They met official representatives who were actually MacGregor's friends. Newspapers published glowing advertisements about farming opportunities in this new paradise. Soon, people were lining up to buy Poyais land certificates and government bonds. In 1822, MacGregor raised the equivalent of over 3 million modern U.S. dollars by selling Poyais bonds, a staggering amount for the time. He even convinced more than 250 Scottish settlers to immigrate to his imaginary kingdom. Ships were prepared. Supplies were loaded. Families sold everything they owned, believing they were moving to a prosperous new world. But when the first ship arrived in late 1822, the settlers found nothing but wilderness. No city, no officials, no houses, no farms, just disease, hunger, and confusion. Within months, more than half of the settlers died from malaria, yellow fever, and starvation. The survivors were eventually rescued by a passing British ship, but by then, MacGregor had already launched a second wave of promotions in France. He was unstoppable until the numbers began to catch up to him. Enter the hero of this story, a London accountant named Charles Woodbury. Woodbury had no political power, no special authority, and no personal grudge. His weapon was simple. He read the numbers. In late 1823, Woodbury was hired to review the financial statements of a London bank holding Poyais bonds. At first, everything looked impressive. The interest rates, the promised yields, the estimated productivity of Poyais. But as Woodbury dug deeper, he noticed inconsistencies. The export projections didn't match known trade routes. The revenue forecasts came from non-existent farms. The population estimates didn't match immigration logs. The supposed royal charter granting MacGregor authority contained spelling errors and formatting inconsistent with Central American documents. And the biggest red flag, no British ship logs showed any official contact with the so-called government of Poyais. Woodbury did what great accountants do. He followed the paper trail. He contacted officials in Honduras and Belize. He compared maps. He reviewed naval records. He checked letters supposedly written by Poyais officials and noticed that the handwriting matched MacGregor's. To confirm his findings, Woodbury quietly interviewed survivors who had returned from the deadly Poyais expedition. Their testimonies revealed the horrifying truth. The land was not a country, not a colony, not even a settlement. It was empty swamp. Realizing the scale of the fraud, Woodbury confronted the bank's board, presenting a report that detailed more than 40 inconsistencies and financial impossibilities. His conclusion was simple but devastating. Poyais did not exist, and investors were being scammed. The board was shocked. They had invested heavily and promoted the bonds publicly. Exposing the fraud meant admitting incompetence, but the truth couldn't be hidden. Woodbury's report leaked to London newspapers. In January 1824, the story exploded. The Great Poyais Fraud screamed the headlines. Investors panicked. Poyais bonds collapsed to nearly zero overnight. European financial markets trembled as other colonial investments were suddenly re-examined for authenticity. MacGregor, always slippery, fled to Paris and attempted to launch another Poyais bond sale, but Woodbury's report had traveled across the Channel. Parisian officials arrested MacGregor for fraud in 1825. His trial became a sensation. Witnesses described the fake kingdom. Survivors told stories of death and starvation. French investors demanded justice. The prosecutor argued that MacGregor had created one of the most audacious and criminal deceptions in modern times. But in a plot twist worthy of a movie, MacGregor was acquitted. His charisma and the political uncertainty of the era allowed him to escape conviction. Still, his reputation was destroyed. He returned to Venezuela, living quietly until his death in 1845, still insisting until the very end that Poyais was real. Meanwhile, Charles Woodbury, the accountant who exposed the fraud, faded into obscurity. His name never became famous. He never gained wealth or recognition, but he saved thousands of people from ruin and prevented millions more from falling for the same scam. The scandal had long-lasting consequences. It helped trigger the Panic of 1825, one of the world's first global financial crises. It forced banks to adopt new rules for verifying overseas assets. It pushed governments to regulate securities more strictly. And it taught investors a lesson still relevant today. Whenever a deal sounds too good to be true, it probably is. The story of Poyais also gave rise to a new term, confidence man or con man. The word came from the idea that fraudsters win by gaining confidence, not by force. Gregor MacGregor didn't create Poyais with armies or weapons. He created it with confidence, with persuasion, with paperwork designed to look official, and with promises tailored to desperate people seeking hope. The real hero of this story is not just the accountant who exposed the lie. It is the idea that truth can be found in careful analysis, in examining evidence, in questioning claims, and in following the numbers, even when the world prefers a beautiful lie. Today's financial systems are bigger, more complex, and more global than ever, but the same dangers remain. Scams grow when information is scarce. Frauds thrive when people chase unrealistic dreams. And the most successful con artists don't hide, they present themselves as saviors. That's why the story of Woodbury and Poyais still matters. It reminds us that skepticism is healthy, that due diligence saves lives, and that sometimes the most powerful hero is not the loudest warrior, but the quiet accountant in the back of the room who simply asks, "Do the numbers make sense?" If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's wildest financial scandals, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe to HistoriNomica for more stories about the hidden forces that shaped our world. Your support helps the channel grow and brings even more incredible history finance stories to life. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.